Boxing.
Beats and rhymes.
No one can do it better.
Bob Arum never took a punch in his life in the ring, made a fortune of boxing, got the nerve to tell boxers they shouldn't sue each other, they should fight each other. Bob Arum is the Mr. Hissy Fit of boxing. I wonder if he'd take the same position if Devin was still signed to him. Didn't he sue Al Heyman because Al came in the game and was whooping his ass and settled out of court? Arum and Oscar De La Hoya getting their ass whooped and sued Al Heyman. What about in the 90s when George Foreman was champion and Tony Tucker was his mandatory for the IBF belt? They swerved Tony Tucker, fought the unknown German Axel Schultz, won a dodgy, controversial majority decision, and when the IBF ordered them to rematch Axel Schultz, Bob Arum threatened to sue the IBF, threw his toys out the pram. George vacated the strap and then was stripped of the WBA belt. So, Bob's saying he can exert his power, but the boxers need to know their place. That's what he's saying, basically. How about you stay out of the Haney'S business and shut the fuck up? How about that? Because that's what he would say to somebody who had an opinion if he was in a lawsuit with somebody, whether he was the plaintiff or the defendant. Believe me, he wasn't just talking for himself. He was talking for the old boy network, that old money. Basically trying to strip boxers of their power, turn public opinion against them. Yeah, you just go in there and fight. You got no business going into the courtroom. You don't know what you're doing. I haven't heard him address the fight just gone this weekend at the MSG, where Sandy Ryan was attacked with paint, and there was an intimidation campaign where they were smearing her name in New York. Has he addressed that?
Boxing.
Beats and rhymes.
No one can do it better.
ZHANIBEK arrived in Australia. When asked why he came to Australia so late and didn't give himself more time to acclimatise, through the interpreter he said, it's not really an issue. They decided to extend the camp in Kazakhstan because there's not a big time difference between Kazakhstan and Australia. I believe it's 5 hours. He lives in California, and if he had set up camp there and came to Australia, then you're talking about a 17-hour time difference. So it makes a little more sense why they chose to do that. When asked was he disappointed that Top Rank lost the purse bid to the Aussies, he said it's not his business. He's there to fight. He's got a job to do. Kept it very businesslike, short and to the point. The WBO belt will not be on the line. It didn't say why in the article. And with ZHANIBEK fainting and not being able to make the weight cut, he would have perhaps preferred if the IBF belt weren't on the line because the rehydration clause is in play. £10 rehydration clause, Friday morning weigh-in. It would have to be a concern to Top Rank and perhaps Team ZHANIBEK and his fan base.
Boxing.
Beats and rhymes.
No one can do it better.
Melissa Smith, boxing historian, is what it says here. She's talking about the arrival of Saudi Arabia and how it's excluding women. You know, they're drawing up all these plans. The promoters are all getting together, but the women are not being discussed. And she uses Raven Chapman versus Sky Nicholson on the undercard of Beterbiev and Bivol as an example that this is just a token gesture. Look, we've got women on there, stop complaining. Then she went on to say, like, Caroline Dubois is a great talent. How come she wasn't on the undercard where her brother stopped Anthony Joshua in the heavyweight title fight? Well, I don't know how much she follows Caroline Dubois and her recent interviews and her back and forths with her dad. She's not talking to Daniel and she's not talking to her old man. There was a few women on Twitter just the other month. They was talking about similar issues in women's boxing as this, that the Saudis are going to exclude everyone. But if you're a big advocate of women's boxing, how come I don't see none of these people like this woman here acknowledging that in 2016 Eddie Hearn put women's boxing on the map? It had been laying dormant for a long time. Failing to acknowledge that is ignorance. Eddie Hearn, Anthony Joshua, that name again. She fought on a lot of AJ undercards. AJ signed up Ramla Ali to 258. Then Matchroom acquired the likes of Ebony Bridges, Natasha Jonas, Shannon Courtney, Jessica McCaskill, Chantel Cameron, and a lot more that I can't remember off the top. After all the success that Eddie was having with Katie Taylor, Frank was forced to sign Nicola Adams, who ironically he had a spat with before, saying that women's boxing is not in his interest, and she had an argument with him in the media, in the newspapers, and he ended up having to sign her. Out of all the old school promoters, I didn't hear Barry Hearn saying anything negative from the UK about women's boxing. But Frank Warren, he went in. Frank Maloney, he went in. Jane Couch didn't stand a chance against these promoters and the British Boxing Board of Control, who she took to court and won a lawsuit. Bob Arum, he used to promote Christy Martin on Mike Tyson cards, but you've heard some of the negative comments he said about women's boxing recently. The resurgence of women's boxing recently, from a point of visibility and how much women are actually able to eat from boxing. This is probably the boom period of women's boxing. Why isn't nobody asking Kathy Duva, she's still active with main events, why she isn't doing more? At one stage, I don't know if this is the case now, main events, Kathy Duva's imprint, had all female staff running the day-to-day business. There's some people who think Kathy got it from the mud.
She actually inherited main events
from her husband Dan Duva and his brother Lou Duva, yeah? And the bottom line is, in Saudi Arabia, in that part of the world, you're not going to see a lot of women's boxing there. And
in the more westernized locations around the world, men generally don't want to see women's boxing.
Period. These are their responses to the article. The fact is, nobody cares about women's boxing, no matter how much they try cramming it down our throats. Someone else said, I don't blame them. I don't either. Someone said, you know who else doesn't care about women's boxing? Women. Go blame them. Stop shoving it down the throats of male boxing fans. It's not our job to pretend to care about it. All women's sporting events are full of empty bleachers. Women are 50% of the planet and none of them are children. I'm not going to read the rest of what he said. Someone else said, majority of fans don't either, due to weak amount of fighters. Another said, Sky Nicholson is the only female boxer I like. I don't care too much for her fights, but her weigh-ins are sensational. And let me say this with the hindsight that I actually watch women's boxing. A lot of people who are big fans of women's boxing, especially from the period where I'm talking about Eddie Hearn and Katie Taylor, I think they've took it for granted that it's not really self-sustainable. If the promoters withdraw from promoting women on cards, there's not a bunch of people saying, hey, where's women's boxing? There isn't. There's not enough people to create supply and demand. And in the hard economics of the world today, that means it's not self-sustainable. It's surviving off the air that men's boxing breathes. Even boxing, men's boxing, in this country. Well, let's start with terrestrial TV. They barely show it. There was a card on Channel 5 the other day which nobody knew about. I didn't know about it anyway. Where Charlie Edwards headlined. Terrestrial television, don't mess with boxing. You go to the satellites and the apps. Well, DAZN for one are banging their heads to get Premiership football rights to stabilize their app. TNT, Sky Sports, if it was a choice out of boxing or football, boxing might be on its Todd. Time to go. Boxing is a niche sport. Right now, the top men prospects in the UK are not getting the shine that a Matchroom, a Queensbury would like to give them because they've got this Saudi thing they're dealing with now. So it's not just women who ain't getting the attention they would like to get. And there's a lot more men boxers than women. Got to keep perspective here. I think the peak came in 2022. Taylor versus Serrano at the MSG. Now, they're rematching on Netflix on the undercard of Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson. Netflix is huge. It's massive. Mike Tyson, Jake Paul, they're going to get a tremendous bag. But for the benefit of women's boxing, it would have been better if Katie and Amanda were headlining the main event like they did in the MSG rather than being on the undercard to Jake and Mike. But the economics are saying Mike Tyson, Jake Paul undercard. When boxing returned to Ireland in 2023, after a long hiatus after the Regency Hotel shootings, they managed to get Katie Taylor in the free arena, but the plan was Croke Park. But Croke Park wouldn't reduce their stadium higher price. Conor McGregor offered alongside Eddie Hearn to get it done, but it didn't happen. And that was a big window of opportunity, not just for Katie Taylor, but for women's boxing, to show they could get the equivalent of an Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, or Canelo, etc. Melissa Smith asking for Caroline Dubois to be on the big stage because her big brother Daniel's there. Well, she's an IBO champion, and the country are just not interested in Caroline like they are her brother. The nepotism thing It's not everyone's cup of tea, but it works in the case of Eubank Sr., Nigel Benn, Conor Benn, and Eubank Jr. But it's economics. You know, Josh Warrington brought 10,000 people to Wembley Stadium. How much is Caroline going to bring there? One of the issues they have is like, where is Clarissa Shields, Savannah Marshall too? They're both doing MMA. The best combatants in female boxing are going to MMA. What's that all about? Here's the issues it has. Inconsistency, weak gene pool. Michaela Mayor versus Sandy Ryan, weekend gone, is the best female fight we've seen since when? I can't remember. There has been some good fights. Don't get me wrong, there's been some good fights, but like, we're talking about the elites. But if women are to get on Riyadh season, it's got to be elite women boxers in their prime form in fights that people want to see. It can't just be a charity thing. Yeah, we'll put you on because you're women to meet some whack-ass quota to suggest they're not being discriminated against. She talks about Caroline Dubois. Nobody wants to see Caroline Dubois on a Riyadh season against some of the competition she's been fighting at the York Hall. When Matchroom offered her the Beatrice Vieira fight, she and Ben Shalom turned it down. People want to see serious fights on there because Riyadh season is pay-per-view. You got to bring quality, and the women can't bring quality consistently. No disrespect to Melissa Smith, who published this article, but she doesn't address none of the concerns I have here. You know, it's just put them on the card, put them on the card. No, you've got to discuss the return on the investment. That's got to be discussed. The value it brings to the card, that has to be discussed. What doesn't work in boxing is complaining, hoping to be a charity case. That doesn't work. Just on the debate of market forces alone. Doesn't work. What does work is grind. I haven't seen a boxing channel that is predominantly at least dedicated to women's boxing, where they're discussing what matches need to be made, what are the really good matches, who are the upcoming prospects, interviews with champions, contenders, dealing with the real issues that women have, establishing themselves in the game, aside from we just need to be put on and screaming discrimination. You know, the likes of Rosie Perez, Melissa Smith here, and the other lady whose name I've forgot on Twitter, they're complaining about what men are not doing for boxing. Where's the websites, the YouTube channels? The tools and the technology is right here. Let's see a website, a channel dedicated to women's boxing. Produce it well. If you don't develop something from the grassroots and someone just puts you on, it can be easily pulled from underneath you as well. Women's boxing promotions. Start off small, maybe small hall. Put on some small hall promotions where you won't need massive crowds and massive budgets. Try and get sponsors, whether you're doing media or promotions, but it's hard work. And what it seems to me, a lot of these women are trying to guilt men into putting women's boxing on, but I don't see the determination and the hunger and the application from them themselves. You can't expect men to put it on and they don't see you believe in yourself. There's websites out there, YouTube channels, small hall promoters out there, boxing magazines. Some are now defunct, who have been tolling away for years, working for next to nothing, with nothing but their passion fueling their drive. And I'm talking about men for the most part. To sum it up, there's nothing good in boxing that hasn't come from some kind of struggle. That's what gives it its authenticity.
Boxing.
Beats and rhymes.
No one can do it better.
Because I'll clean him out.
When do you end it?
Within 6, I think. Within 6.
What's your immediate reaction to that?
Oh, he's a jarring dickhead, you know. He thinks he's world level. He thinks he can just walk in there and take me out in 6 rounds. Not a prayer. Not. He's delusional. I feel like he's got an obligation to try and impress his little Ipswich fan base. Wanker, man. I think he's going to walk onto a shot and knock himself out.
I haven't really got a prediction. I'm just wondering if the winner will show world-class potential and we could be potentially talking about a showdown with Daniel Dubois, an all-British showdown with either FRAZER or FABIO. FABIO is the likely one to end it inside the distance. He can be outboxed, and FRAZER showed that last time out. I think FRAZER, if he can get his conditioning, maybe come in a few pounds lighter, but if he can improve his hand speed, just even fractionally, I think he gives FABIO a boxing lesson at stages. Let's hope we get a decisive winner this time. No draws. I'll try and break down a prediction, but not now. Not now, if you'll give me the grace. But I wouldn't mind seeing a Dubois-Joshua rematch.
But I also want to see new matches. I want to see the division open itself up a little. And with a new champion, we can at least look at exploring the possibilities. Does anyone believe the winner out of FRAZER CLARKE and Fabio Wardley has a chance to beat the new and improved Daniel Dubois?
Boxing.
Beats and rhymes.
No one can do it better.
I forgot what interviews they were said in, but Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren, and I think Frank Smith would have made a comment as well. They talked about Simon Jordan, and obviously your relationship with Simon Jordan. They were saying that Simon has an interest in boxer, a financial interest, and there's a working relationship there with yourself and Simon Jordan. Is that true that Simon Jordan would have a financial interest in your company?
Simon Jordan has no financial interest in boxer and never has. I don't think they like the fact that someone is supportive of us, maybe someone that sees things for what they are, maybe someone that isn't afraid to speak his mind. There's a lot of people that are scared to speak their mind, especially in boxing.
Well, if Eddie and Frank are lying, it's slanderous, and Simon seems the type to me who would be threatening legal action if he knew Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren were putting false information about him having a financial involvement in boxer. I haven't got the receipt, but he just said, I don't have no involvement. He didn't say it's a ridiculous claim. These guys, blah, blah. You know, he likes a good rant, but he didn't do that. And I suspect, even though it might be hard to prove, he has been involved in raising funds for Ben Shalom's promotional outlet. The paper trail, however, may be a little hard to produce as evidence. But if he is found to have an involvement, then TalkSport will surely have to come to a decision, if not legally, at least morally, that there's a conflict of interest here, because observers can clearly see he's more favourable to Ben Shalom than he is to Eddie or Frank. If it continues, it's a situation that could go to Ofcom, and there are rules of due partiality, where you just can't be that biased, especially if you have a conflict of interest, if this is what it is.
Boxing.
Beats and rhymes.
No one can do it better.